Welcome to the Kara's Cure Show, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness. I'm Kara Sundlin, and we're talking about big emotions and little kids. It can certainly be hard as a parent to really know how to respond when our children are dealing with all kinds of emotions. It, of course, can trigger us as well. But there's a new children's book that tackles this topic, and here to tell us more about it is author Jessica Bubbico. Thanks for being with us, Jessica.
Thank you for having me.
I was so interested when you sent me information about this, because as a mom, I feel like this is what we go through every day.
Yeah.
Someone, whether they're being a toddler or a teenager, there are different kinds of meltdowns, but big emotions are something that I think most parents struggle to deal with when it's coming out of their children.
Totally. Yeah. It's funny. I'm visiting my family in Connecticut right now. And so it's interesting because they say, like, with family, you know how to push each other's buttons as well. So sometimes it's even, again, and your kids might go to school, they behave one kind of way, they come home, they behave a different kind of way, so it's,
right.
We are emotional beings, and, there's so many ways to work through them and support ourselves.
So you wrote the book because there are skills to handling big emotions, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So we don't come knowing how to do this.
I guess the way I would say it is, I think in terms of, like, we've been taught societally that if we have big emotions, that there's something wrong, instead of just seeing big emotions as energy in motion. Like, it's just a bodily function that happens for us to feel emotions, experience emotions in response to our environment around us. And so I think being able to start to see emotions as feedback, as opposed to, like, oh, there's something wrong or something bad is happening because I'm feeling anger or sadness. It's like, what if we just started to see it as feedback and allowed ourselves to feel it and get curious about it?
Mm-hmm. It sounds like a great way to approach it, and I've heard that before. If you name it, you tame it. But we get triggered by our own kids, right? So
yeah,
I know we're going to learn this in a fun way, and if you're listening, I'm actually going to read a couple passages, because the idea is we learn when we read this book too.
Yes.
But for those who are listening, like, what's one thing to really keep in mind when our kids are having huge emotions, and maybe we're feeling triggered too?
Oh my gosh, that is such a great question. I feel like that's the age-old question. I think the biggest thing is allowing your kid to feel what it is that they're feeling in the moment, but also recognizing that you might be triggered in that moment as well, and that's okay. I think there's a piece of this of awareness first and foremost, and then acceptance of what's happening. That might mean you need to go, depending upon the age of your child, like, go and take a walk or go outside. Like, give yourself a little bit of space when your child is experiencing something as well, because at the end of the day, we need that space. Your child needs the space, you need the space. So depending upon the situation, the safety involved, it's important, I think, for the parent to give themselves space and to be like, it's okay, I got triggered by that. That was hard, and call it out in the moment.
So even saying that to your kids, like, I think all moms, we all have mom guilt when we yell at our kids afterwards. Like, oh, we're not supposed to do that. Yeah. And maybe that's more with this generation. Maybe back in the day, your parents were allowed to yell at you, and children are supposed to be seen and not heard. But in these days, people feel guilty when they are not doing things, quote unquote, perfectly.
Sure.
And that's a whole nother show. But let's just say you've made that mistake and you got triggered and all the emotions got big. You didn't lose, right? You can then go back and say, you can model how we would repair this and what I would have done differently, and that in of itself is teaching?
Oh, 100%. And think about it, with your kids, being able to model to them that adulthood isn't about being perfect. Like, we live in this social media age where we look online and we're like, oh, this person has it best, or this person has it this way, or I struggled today, this person is parenting perfectly. And I think we're all seeing that, kids are seeing that. We see a rise in anxiety in children with the rise of social media. So I think being able to be honest in that moment and say, hey, you know what? I blew up and it's okay, let's talk through it. Here's how I may have handled it differently, I think is important.
Yeah. So the book is called Jessie Lou and the Magic of You. Is it about you?
It sure is. Yeah. I was a little kid with big emotions. I'm now a big kid with big emotions as well. And one of the big things, the book actually came forward during the pandemic. So I was going through it. It was probably like a couple of weeks before the pandemic. And I was going through a tough emotional time, and I went to lunch and I sat down and I was like, I'm just gonna write about my emotions, and out popped this whole story of Jessie Lou and the Magic of You. And I came home and shared it with my family, and they were like, you should publish this. Like, this is a really great story. I sat on it for a few years, and this past year was the right time to get going on moving it out there, especially with so many people having these emotional challenges post-pandemic.
Well, I love, they say we teach what we have to learn.
Yes.
And you have a history of a speech pathologist, but you're really saying, like, you literally were this kid. You're not some special person that just knows how not to get angry or how not to feel this way.
Yeah.
Like, you just, in fact, everybody feels this way, but you're teaching us how we can handle it.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, again, I experience emotions all of the time, and I have a couple of really good friends in my life that will remind me, like, okay, sit and feel it, or I'll go back to my book. I actually went to an event a couple weeks ago, and I was feeling so uncomfortable, and I was like, I wrote a book about this. And I went into the bathroom, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna just like move my body for a little bit. I'm gonna identify what I'm feeling, which was anxious, and I was like, it's okay to feel anxious. And then I was like, I'm gonna take 5 deep breaths, and then I'm gonna re-anchor into, it's okay to feel anxious, it's okay to not know what to say, and just go out there and be yourself. And I was like, oh, great. This is helpful for everyone. It's such a simple concept that can support anybody.
Well, I love, and I've read this before, but it's worth repeating if you haven't heard this, or you can say it as the expert here, but that we get so entangled in our emotions, and it feels like they're never going to end. But really, if we recognize it and breathe through it, an emotion really only lasts about 60 to 90 seconds.
Exactly.
And it could be over.
Exactly. Well, and most of us try to think our emotions versus feel our emotions. And so we'll go, well, I'm really mad, and what made me mad? And I'm, okay, well, it was probably this, well, it's their fault, or it's like, wait, what if you just stopped and you took a few seconds and you breathed and you felt angry? And for me, you actually are on a great part of the book where it's all about moving your body.
Yes.
So she says, I can't remember.
She says, some emotions are big and you want to let them out. Your body wants to move, to yell, or to shout. Understanding your emotions might feel confusing or hard, but it's important to feel them instead of keeping them jarred. And there's actually a little picture of Jessie Lou's feelings. So it's a good visual for kids and for big kids that we don't want to stuff.
Exactly. And the thing is, like, you know, there's a difference if you're feeling angry and there's like violence. That's like very different versus, you know, for me, if I'm feeling anger, like I'll get up and I might like do a big motion with my body just to get it out. I might shake. Shaking is actually a really great way to move emotions and energy through. And it can be so simple. Go in the bathroom, you shake, you get it out, and you move it through your body.
Kids are gonna be like, I don't want to be weird.
Exactly.
So you're saying that they also don't want to feel bad. So teaching them that you don't have to do this in front of everybody, but just going and using some motion. Often our child psychologists will say, move a muscle, change a mood, because it's our body's way of dispelling that, as you said, energy and motion.
Exactly, yeah. And again, it doesn't have to take a long time. I think oftentimes emotions feel big, and it's different for everybody. I experience them in a big way. Other people might experience them in a different way. But it doesn't need as big of a solution as the feeling feels. So if anger is like welling up inside of me, or sadness is welling up inside of me, because it's big, I might think, oh my gosh, I need to go and do something big, figure it out who made me feel this way. But really, it might just be go and shake, take a couple of deep breaths, and come back into your body, and you'll feel instantly different.
You may really make a different decision after the emotion has passed. So thinking of them like waves, that they are, this too shall pass, it's going to pass.
Exactly.
And then, not that if someone wronged you, and someone really wronged your kid, there might be someone who's really mean, but the idea that it doesn't mean you're not going to act. You're just going to get to a place of regulation first.
Exactly.
So and when we're getting really big, our nervous system's actually dysregulated, right?
That's exactly what it is. And so when we're in that dysregulated state, we don't have access to that part of our brain that goes, okay, be calm, be rational, say something nice. We have access to that part of the brain that's primal and reptilian and goes, you got to hurt that person before they hurt you, verbally. You know, your kid yells at you or calls you a name or whatever it may be. It's attack mode. But meeting that energy, that emotion back with attack because you're getting triggered might not be the best way to do it, but also you have to give yourself grace in that moment because somebody's getting triggered, you're getting triggered, you have two dysregulated nervous systems talking to each other. You don't have two logical, rational human beings talking to each other.
Yeah, and it's really important too because I think when you lose it as an adult or maybe as a kid, you kind of feel bad after.
Yeah.
You feel like I'm really, I shouldn't have said those things. I'm crazy. I lost my temper. I mean, for those of us who feel emotions big, which I do, people might not realize that because I in this job that doesn't seem to come out, I can be very regimented, but but other times I could definitely feel myself like getting very emotional and like, oh gosh, I felt that. So the point being, instead of feeling bad that you lost it or you yelled or you behaved in an unperfect way, I love that you're right. Jessie Lou asked, all of this time, I thought there was something wrong with me, but moving my body sets my emotions free, question mark. So she's curious, like, you mean all I have to do is move and and that's normal? So you're normalizing that we can all feel this way sometimes.
Totally. And you know, I think we're taught that, again, if we have to make a repair of some kind, like a relational repair. So even as an example, like I said, I'm home visiting my family, and my mom said something yesterday, and I found myself just in that moment, I was like, anger came up. But it was because she had no idea the context of what had happened before I came home, or, you know, whatever it may be. And so I got a little bit defensive in that moment. But being able to say, hey, you know what? I know you don't know the backstory. I know I got defensive in that moment. I'm sorry. It wasn't you. There was a lot more here. That's really where this came from. It wasn't personal, and I'm sorry. Can do a whole lot. And I think at the end of the day, emotional repairs help us to feel closer to people as opposed to farther away. So learning those skills like saying sorry, or saying, you know, I was having a moment, or whatever it may be, starting to develop language around that can actually strengthen our relationships through big emotions.
Well, and I love that there's practical things, right? This is a 5-step framework for children and adults.
Yes.
So we learn as we're doing it. We can pretend we're teaching them, but we're learning too. But now that you felt your sadness and had a big cry, I'll teach you something new. Let's give it a try. And I'll read it, but maybe you can show us, because this is something we can teach our kids. I've tried. It's very powerful. Naturally, when we put our hand on our heart, we can calm our nervous system. But place a hand on your heart and a hand on your belly. Jessie Lou watched and followed along with Nellie. For this next part, you'll breathe nice and slow. Take 10 big, deep breaths. Let's give it a go. So the idea you're showing us, like this book would be perfect to create a video with it too.
Yes.
Putting your hand on your heart or your hand on your belly. Or I've also heard sometimes little kids, you can tell them with butterflies, but there's a reason we put our hand on our heart.
Yes. Well, and it gives us that connection back home to the heart. And this is the strongest field on your body, is your heart. And so being able to take that moment and go, oh my gosh, I was in my head or at wherever, just come here, come back home and breathe. And in the book too, I gave some directions on how to do this with kids, of like, breathe in through the nose for 4, and then breathe out through the mouth for anywhere from 4 to 8.
Well, you want the exhale to be a little longer. And that's something we learn when we do teaching meditation and all this. Ideally, we're gonna slow that stress response better when we breathe out longer than we breathe in.
Exactly. The exhale, a longer exhale, helps to calm the body. A deeper inhale is going to help to energize the body, but a deeper exhale is going to help to calm the body. And then in terms of like even making a sound as you breathe out. So I say like blowing out birthday candles in the book. But making a little bit of sound also starts to create, like this, it starts to calm the nervous system as well. So
you, as a speech pathologist, have you worked with a lot of different kids and some who might also have special needs?
Yeah.
And we know that sometimes kids who are on the spectrum or kids with ADHD, sometimes emotional dysregulation could be some of their biggest symptoms, even though we all have this.
Yeah. Well, and you know, it starts to like zoom the conversation out into on a much larger scale, because we start to look at like environmental factors and how environmental factors are also affecting our body. Like a child who's, child with autism with lights overhead, like bright lights. I mean, even adults, it's hard to be in a bright light a lot of the time. But you can start to see how environmental factors can also affect the body. And I mean, all kids in general, whether it's a child who's, has a diagnosis of some kind or not. But Yeah, I mean, I find a lot of children get this, you know,
They get it. Well, but they don't always have the language or the know-how, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's what the aim of this book, again, if you're still wondering, what's that again? It's Jessie, Lou, and the Magic of You, and I'll just say it is available everywhere, including on your website, which is jessielou.books.com.
Yep.
But it's also available on Amazon, and the idea is that we would be able to do this together.
Yeah.
And in the back, I mean, it's pretty easy. We have, before you get started, we have pause, and then we have step 1. And so this is something that you said, even as the author of this book, you'll go, when you were having a tough moment, you went back to remind yourself of these steps.
Exactly. And if you turn the page, just one page, there's a very cute dog in the book named Gus.
Okay. Which zone are you feeling?
So,
that's the Gus zone, right?
Yeah. So this is the zones, these different zones for emotions. And what's nice here is that you can use, so step 2 is like identify the emotion that you're feeling. And then once you've finished, you can come back and go, okay, I started here. What did that deep breath do for me? Well, it took me from that red zone into that blue zone and into relaxed.
Because red zone is annoyed, frustrated, angry. Blue zone, we've got relaxed, sleepy, calm. Yellow, happy, excited, silly. Green, scared, sad, worried. So really, you can ask your child, what emotions are you feeling, using the Gus emotions chart? And then don't judge or try to change any emotion. Just simply listen and let them share their experience. So we get this wrong as parents a lot, right? Like then they say, I'm mad, you won't give me a cookie. And if we say, well, you're not supposed to have a cookie before dinner. Like we don't even acknowledge that in their world they have a right to feel that way. Well, you shouldn't be mad about that. It's not good for you. That's sort of the wrong thing. We don't want to judge. We don't want to tell them how they should feel. Our job more is to be there and teach them how to feel it?
I would say so, and I think also not making yourself wrong if in that moment you're like, well, that's not what we're having right now, right? So it's like, again, having that grace for yourself to be able to be like, okay, I know I don't maybe feel frustrated with my child that they want cookies before dinner or whatever, but yeah, I mean, just being able to say, okay, I know you're mad, tell me more about that. What's going on for you? How does that feel in your body? What's making you feel mad? Is there something else that you're wanting? Just, again, I think the word, if I had to put any word to this, it would be curiosity. And if we stop seeing emotions as wrong and we see them as a reason to get curious and a reason to open up connection. I have a friend who was saying last night she has a newborn baby, and she was like, when my newborn baby is crying, like there's this part of me that feels guilty or I feel wrong, like right out of the gate.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, what would it be like to just be there and just let the baby cry and let the emotions move? Because again, they're primal. What does a baby do when it first...
Well, also babies sometimes will cry for not being upset, but just they don't have a voice to speak, so they...
Exactly.
That's a whole nother show, but there's a great... I'll say to your friend, read The Baby Whisperer, The Secrets of the Baby Whisperer. But she had... I learned a lot from her as well, one of my favorite baby books, because she had dealt with nonverbal adults her whole life, helping them. And so then she realized babies weren't always upset, they just couldn't talk. So they were communicating, and if we could understand what they're really communicating, which is another thing that's happening here, like your child also may not have all the language.
Exactly.
So if we could understand what they're communicating and somehow validate that, like I know you're really upset right now because you really want a cookie. Doesn't mean we're going to give it to them. This isn't about being indulgent. It's just trying to more just reflect what they're feeling.
100%. The validation of emotions, I think, just to be able to say, I understand that. Like, I understand how you're feeling, can do a lot.
People say that all the time. Validate and it'll help. Why is that? Is there a why to that?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm sure somebody out there does.
We just feel better. I mean, I know what you're saying. Like, even if you're fighting with your partner, your spouse, and they go, I know, that must have been really hard for you, all of a sudden you get less defensive.
Yeah.
So I guess just by someone making them feel like they're on your team without necessarily agreeing with you, because I think that's the struggle as a mom.
Yeah.
You know, they might throw a fit because you're asking them to do your homework, and you're like, come on, you have to do your homework. That's part of it.
Yeah.
But instead, like acknowledging, saying, I know it's a drag to do summer work right now.
Yeah.
I know that stinks, but you know, you got to get this done, or how can I help? I guess instead of you got to get this done, like how can I help? Or something like that.
There's, I don't know who, this is, I always want to have references when I share something, but I was reading something the other day and I can't remember who it's by, but the idea of joining, like we're joining in with the person and having that shared experience with them versus them being alone. Oftentimes, when we just validate something, even if it's like me validating my own feeling and saying, I feel angry right now, I feel better. I'm like, oh, I just addressed it, because I'm no longer telling myself it's wrong or I shouldn't be angry. So I think the same thing when we're in connection with a partner, a friend, a child, whomever. Like, I've seen so much healing happen just by going, that really does stink. I'm really sorry to hear that. Like, I'm sorry.
And we know
you're
that as
feeling
adults,
way.
like the people who don't agree with us, or if our spouse like kind of, that's ridiculous, why would you feel that way? We immediately get defensive. Or if our boss were to say something that they'd have no acknowledgement of maybe how hard you're working, anything like that, where you don't feel acknowledged, we get more defensive, and the emotions could get bigger as adults. So that's what you're saying here. And I guess what you're saying is validation is not condoning. I think that's a struggle for a parent. You're like, I don't want to condone this. This is bad behavior. Yeah. But the first step of the connection is not condoning, it's just connecting.
100%, yeah. And not saying, oh, there is something wrong with this situation, or what. It's just, you're feeling that way. It's okay. We validate the feeling. Yeah. We allow it to move through, and then we move forward.
Because as moms, we'll get triggered too. Let's say the kid is having a meltdown in the grocery store. Immediately, mom feels bad. They're like, no, you're not supposed to be crying. Yeah. And the old school would be like, remove your child and punish them, or whatever. Yeah. What you're saying, from being an emotional coach as you are, the Jessie Lou book would say, we might calm them down even faster if we can soothe them, connect with them first. Exactly. It doesn't mean that we're condoning having a meltdown in public.
Exactly. Yeah. And oftentimes you find with kids, if you reinforce that behavior by giving it attention in a way to go, okay, they're screaming and crying because they want cookies, or they want, whatever, you end up reinforcing the behavior because you're giving them attention, versus going, okay, just take a second, feel like, and we're going to move forward.
I love that it's a 5-step program, but it's really 6, because the first one is pause. The power of pause. That's for everyone, right? Where is the power of pause? Why does it matter if we slow down?
Oh, that's another great question. I mean, the power of the pause, I think, is where we start to develop our awareness in the moment. But it's a trained skill to teach yourself how to pause, because we're taught to problem solve. So often, and especially moms. Like, moms are really taught to problem solve. Let me fix it. Let's figure out what it is. But how many of us, I mean, have you ever not benefited from just taking a second and pausing and going like, okay, let me ground? Because oftentimes when we're acting from that chaotic state or that problem solving state, we're not actually using, again, our full brain. We're only using that part of our brain that's in that survival mode in the moment. So the pause is really just to breathe, re-regulate yourself, reconnect back to the moment, so that you can act from a place of grounded calm versus chaos and reactivity.
Yeah, there's you've probably heard of his work, but I'm thinking of Dan Siegel and the Whole Brain Child, and he's got it's on YouTube if anyone wants to Google it, but he's got this is your brain, and this is your brain when you're flipped. Yeah. And there's a staircase, and children don't have any access when their brain is flipped to the staircase to go downstairs to the rational brain. So we need to first get the brain, he says, to come back like this. Yep. And then we can talk to everyone. And also, I guess we should know that our kids aren't really just little adults. They don't have the same ability to rationalize or process, because that whole part of the brain that does that isn't even developed yet.
Exactly. They don't have the prefrontal cortex fully developed to be able to go, oh, I should do that, or I shouldn't do that, or that's a good idea.
So feel bad that if we're losing it, that they're going to lose it even more.
Exactly.
So the power of the pause is 1. Step 1 after that is the big breath. And then step 2 is, and it's all written out here. So it's you want to name the feeling, right? So step 2, how are you feeling right now? And that's because, and when we name something, we tame it. Yeah. We kind of move it outside of ourselves a little bit. I guess it helps us pause a little bit more too. Yeah. Okay. Step 3, that's when we start breathing. Yeah. Okay. And then step 4, we take a breath to the count of 4. So step 4, that's easy. We're not only breathing, we're trying to breathe to the count of 4. Yeah. And if we can remember, hopefully we're going out longer. Yeah, exactly. And step 5, once they've finished, you said, have them open their eyes and then go back to the gust chart. Do we usually find that's different, that if they start out as scared, as angry, after they've done the 10 breaths and ask them how they're feeling now, they're in a different color?
It depends, because sometimes it will just be that it's lessened or they have a different perspective on it. Like, I was really mad, but now I'm starting to feel a little bit better in my belly, or I might still feel a little bit sad or a little bit angry, but I also might feel a little bit calm or a little bit happy. So I think we start to see in the book, it says her emotions were beginning to melt. So I think we'll see, like, they might completely change zone, or they might stay in the same zone with it being a little bit less than it was before with the addition of another emotion. But again, it takes us out of that fight or flight mode.
Yes.
And just brings us back into that space of being able to access
and just
the whole
knowing
brain.
that we have two nervous systems, right? I mean, we can get fancy and call it the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, but just as fight or flight, or our rest and digest, our calm. So we just want to use our breath as sort of the remote control. We need to flip back.
Exactly.
The final step, which I think is so important, and we probably don't talk about this so much, is celebrate. You say we need to celebrate when they've moved through it, just the fact that they had the courage to feel their feelings.
Exactly.
Even if they're still in a crummy mood, you're celebrating that you did a good job feeling your feelings.
Exactly. And again, it creates a level of positive reinforcement that even, a child being able to say, like, okay, eventually, as we do this activity more and more, we come to a point where we can go, okay, like, I'm mad, and like, I know I'm mad. I'm gonna go give myself a second. I'm gonna go in the other room. I'm gonna punch the air or whatever, and then I can come back and be able to maybe tell a little bit of why or what happened. So I think my intention is that this is an emotional regulation tool and creates emotional resilience for kids.
Yeah, because when we feel like we can move through big emotions, that's when we really get resilient. And I think we know that as adults, some of the toughest times in our life, we made it through, and the gift was we were more resilient after.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's that Steve Jobs quote. It's like, you can't connect the dots looking forward, but you can always connect them backwards. I think the same thing when we look at big emotions and turbulent times in our lives, we can go, oh, that actually was for a purpose.
Yeah, or I learned something. At least, there's the lotus, right, that grows in mud. No mud, no lotus, is the ancient saying. But so I love that it's very practical for moms who are like, I don't have a lot of time. You're already reading to your kids.
Yeah.
And I think the good thing is we as moms are learning too, or dads. Yeah. But you say that a good thing to do is just read this book at night, or maybe make a morning routine. You could start building emotional awareness every day. But as we do this, then it's the practice. We're building our muscle. Like, this is a muscle. So
exactly. And again, it's, when you name something, when you have an awareness of something, you can do something about it. So if we just kind of keep emotions and shame in the closet and go like, oh, we shouldn't look at that, or we shouldn't, whatever, then it's really hard to ever do anything about it because you haven't named it. So I think being able to use this as a tool to talk about emotions, to feel through them, to normalize them.
Yep.
Then you can't help but shift things.
That is our time for now, but the book is called Jessie Lou and the Magic of You. Jessie Lou and the Magic of You, and maybe we can put it up on the screen one more time, but it's jessieloubooks.com, and you also can be found on Instagram, also at Jessie Lou Books. And it's Jessie with an I, we should say, but available on Amazon. Thank you so much. I think it's a great resource for parents, and I hope you do really well with this. Thank you.
Thank you.
And there we go, lessons for us adults as well. Have a great day, everyone, and be well. Thanks for being here for CURES.